Welcome back, Mando.
Oh, ho, ho, ho. Greetings, Bucketheads. Mevar Tigar. Welcome to our 273rd Sparking the Light Rebellion episode of Mandovision. And I am your host, Dark Eye Tom. Thank you so much for checking out this small independent Star Wars podcast. We're so glad to have you with us. Reach out to us on the socials. We're at Mando_Vision on Twitter, /X, and Instagram. You can email the show, mandovisiontom@gmail.com. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, and share this show with all the Mandalorians in your coverts. All right, Bucketheads, welcome back. We are a bit late in our show release for this week. The holiday on Monday, coupled with a new work schedule, has made recording a bit tricky. We're in a bit of a transition phase with my schedule and my free time, but that's going to be okay. You're still going to get your shows once a week. It just may be, well, this week might be the only one that's a long gap, but hopefully we get a little bit more on track next week as well, because we're kicking off a new era, basically, on Mandovision, in a sense, in a very light sense, as we transition from our Star Wars: The Clone Wars rewatch into our Star Wars Rebels rewatch. And astute listeners out there, you might be wondering, wait a second, didn't Tom say he was going to do some Mandovision Reads episodes to talk about some of the Star Wars content he's been consuming on the printed page? And yes, my friends, you are correct. I did say that, and I will produce those episodes soon. Everything got a little topsy-turvy over the holiday weekend. Friends in town, people staying over, required me to return a lot of the reading materials to another room in the house and not look at them for several days. So those episodes are still in the works. They're still coming soon. But in the meantime, we're going to get started on our Star Wars Rebels rewatch. It's going to take me a minute to get used to saying Star Wars Rebels instead of Star Wars: The Clone Wars. I just kind of had that on the brain. That was like muscle memory at this point, just spitting out all that stuff for The Clone Wars. But yeah, it's exciting because this is my first time really rewatching Rebels. Rebels, like Clone Wars, was a show that it took me a little bit to get the feel for before I became like very invested in the series. My initial thoughts on season 1 when it first debuted was that it was a little uneven. I suspect this time around, knowing the story beats a little bit ahead of time, knowing like the characters' trajectories ahead of time, I will have a less stern reaction to it than maybe I did the first time around. So that's something very, very exciting to look forward to, and again, it was interesting. I watched the first 2 episodes, or the first debut episode, depending on how you look at it. And that was something I tried to get a little bit more clarity on through the internet, but the information I got was a little upside down, topsy-turvy. Some sources say, yeah, this is the first 2 episodes are technically one episode together. That's how it's looked at in IMDb and a couple of other places. Disney Plus has it broken down differently as the Spark of Rebellion Part 1, Spark of Rebellion Part 2. If you go to older sources, they're like, oh yeah, it was originally called Ezra Part 1 and Ezra Part 2. I vaguely remember it being debuted on Disney Plus as a hour-long feature, but that's also possible that I maybe just watched like a special broadcast of it combined, and that was how it was. So I don't really remember exactly how it all was theoretically broken down. I do remember like a DVD release of the first 2 episodes, just kind of thrown out there as Spark of the Rebellion. But again, that's all sort of besides the point. so much meandering, right? I also, as I rewatched these 2 episodes, or 1 episode, depending on how you want to look at it, I rewatched those little 3-minute shorts that sort of introduced us to the characters. Again, it's been 10 years since I had watched those. And yes, in case you were wondering, I mean, we are right around the corner from the 10th anniversary of the debut of Rebels. So yeah, we time flies when you're having fun in Star Wars land. But yeah, I got to revisit those shorts that I had very vague recollections of. But they were a good reminder that the creative people behind the series definitely had a good feel for the characters and the directions they want to take them in, and who they were as they entered the series. Now, one of the takeaways from this first episode, as we're introduced to all of them, and sort of the dynamics that they all have with each other, we don't get to learn a lot really quickly. We just sort of get like really quick flashes of why we're going to like this character, this character, and this character, and this character, and kind of how they all play off each other. A lot of their backstories aren't things we get into anytime soon. We start getting hints and things like that. But it's not until the show kind of grows that we get to experience that. And I think that's actually one of the things I liked about this first episode going into it. I had sort of forgotten that Ezra kind of had to be persuaded to be noble and self-sacrificing. I had sort of forgotten also that Kanan very quickly reveals his Jedi status to the world. It was like little things like that I was like, oh yeah, I sort of forgot they did that. That was fun to go back and revisit. There's a lot of stuff in these episodes that I really, really like. And I'll just tell you right now the thing that I don't. The thing that I don't like about these episodes. The animation, to my eye, isn't great. It's almost a little too cartoony. The edges are a lot softer on the characters than I think suits them best. And I think that's something that does get refined and polished over the course of the series, because my recollections of the final season of Rebels is definitely less cartoony, less of these soft palettes on the characters, these smoothed edges on them. But I guess we'll see if I'm full of Bantapudu or not as we make our way through the series. So let's go ahead and do what we normally do and get into the episode in particular. But to do that, we're gonna give credit where credit is due, and that is to the wonderful people, the voice cast, the plot, all those good things that we normally do. So the format of the podcast isn't changing drastically for Rebels. Don't worry, friends. This is Star Wars Rebels, Season 1, Episodes, depending on who you ask, 1 and 2, Spark of Rebellion, or Ezra, Part 1 and Part 2. Original air date, September 26, 2014. That's right, 10 years, right around the corner. Episodes written by Greg Weisman and Simon Kinberg. I had forgotten Simon Kinberg had been involved in this series. A little bit of a Hollywood coming down the pipe to play in Star Wars land. And of course, Greg Weisman, the creator of one of my favorite animated series of all time, Gargoyles. I had actually forgotten his involvement in the series in the early run. The episodes are directed by Stephen G. Lee and Stuart Lee. So getting a little progression of our Clone Wars directors into this series. Our primary voice cast for the episode: Taylor Gray is Ezra Bridger, Vanessa Marshall as Hera Syndulla, Freddie Prinze Jr. as Kanan Jarrus, Tia Sakar as Sabine Wren, Steve Bloom as Zeb Orielos, Dave Filoni is Chopper, David Oyelowo is Agent Callus. We get so many others after this. We get James Earl Taylor making a cameo as Obi-Wan Kenobi. We get James Earl Jones as Darth Vader. We get Jason Isaacs as the Grand Inquisitor. And our plot for this debut piloty episode: Ezra Bridger encounters the Ghost Crew and joins them on a mission to free Wookiees from an Imperial Star Destroyer. All right, those are our particulars. Now you know what that means. It is time, friends. Strap on your buckets. Let's go.
Get out of here. We'll hold them off. You're going to have to relocate the covert. This is the way.
This is the way.
All right, friends, Bucketheads, let's talk a little bit about what we get in this debut episode. And we start off really strong with Darth Vader, the Grand Inquisitor, and sort of issuing a message statement that we are on the hunt for the Jedi and the children of the Force, which to me, that is a direct reference to one of my least favorite expanded universe novels from back in the 90s, Children of the Force, I believe written by Barbara Hambly. Ooh, I did not like that book at all. But from Vader's perspective, I think that makes a ton of sense. You know, we're like 14, 15, 16 years removed from episode 3, 5 years before the events of A New Hope. And you'd have to think that any Jedi who survived the Purge are out there. They're laying low, but maybe they've coupled up. Maybe they are producing offspring of their own. But also just because the Jedi were extinguished from the galaxy doesn't mean there aren't Force-sensitive children being born, just like there were beforehand, before the Jedi, before all of it. So that's sort of where the Inquisitors are at now. They've sort of transitioned from the Purge and hunting anyone who escaped Order 66 to now being on the lookout for Force-sensitive children who, because of the fall of the Jedi Order, have not been detected and are laying low. You know, we got tastes of this in Star Wars: The Bad Batch, you know. So clearly it's a thing. We got to be careful. But it's sort of the mission statement for this show. So if you don't think that Ezra Bridger is going to be Force sensitive, you weren't paying attention to what Lord Vader laid out before us. And that was something that initially, again, I can be a grumpy old man sometimes. I will fully admit that is on the record. So sometimes, like when this show was debuting, I sort of rolled my eyes a little bit, like, oh, here we go. Another Jedi will have survived Order 66, and now we're going to train some Force-sensitive kid who's not Luke Skywalker, but is going to do Jedi things before Luke Skywalker's around. Which, in my opinion at the time, detracted from Luke returning as, you know, the Jedi, right? But the Star Wars has been doing this for a little while now. It is what it is. I think it leads to asking more questions than answers we will ever get. You know, like Ahsoka training Sabine instead of participating in the rebellion. You know, things like that where I'm just like, really? That's the choice they're all making? But at least in Ezra's case, we know why he's not in the original Star Wars trilogy. We know where he goes. Same thing with Kanan. We know his fate. So I like that this show sort of puts a bow on things, sort of wraps things up. But we'll talk about more of that stuff as we progress our way through the rewatch. So again, initially, this old man sort of rolled his eyes at the idea of a Force-sensitive child and a Jedi who'd been in hiding. I was like, well, I've seen this before. But I did sort of quickly put that aside because they do a really nice job in this story of introducing us to Ezra as a kid who's lost his parents. We don't know how yet. We don't know the backstory there. But he's on his own, in Lothal, and you know he's a Lothrat, as the Imperials call him. He, you know, lives on the outskirts. He runs into the town to steal supplies, to steal food, but he does it in a way that is also spitting in the face of the Empire, if you will. Like he's stealing from them. He's interrupting their operations, and in his own way, sort of aiding the people of Lothal, even though he sort of takes advantage of them at the same time. It's very selfish, but at the same time, you kind of see that like there's something in there. There's something to work with. There is a purity of heart, but he's on survival instincts. And I think that's the important thing to remember about this era that Rebels is set in, is that particularly for children who are growing up without parents, you know, it's all about survival and trying to stay under the radar of the Empire, but trying to survive. And so even the purest of heart, like Ezra, when we find out about his parents and his upbringing and things like that, it really, like I said, it's a good moment for that character. We sort of brush up against him at first. We sort of like what he's doing, but we sort of don't like what he's doing. He stumbles across the crew of the Ghost. They're pulling a heist. He's sort of into it, but at the same time, he's going to try to capitalize on them and take advantage of them so that he can prosper. But Kanan, being Kanan, sees the potential. They lay out a test eventually. And it's sort of up to Ezra to put aside that me first, my survival is more important than other people's well-being. And I think that's the really nice part of this episode. I think that's a really strong way to bring this kid into the fold. When Ezra first comes aboard the Ghost and he's introduced to Zeb and Sabine and Kanan and Hera, he just thinks they're a crew. He just thinks they're pulling heists. And Sabine's like, we're so much more than that. We're a bunch of friends, we're a bunch of family, but we're all here because of what the Empire's done to us. And it begins to show Ezra that the galaxy is full of people who have been ruined by the Empire, by having things taken away from them by the Empire, that he's not alone. Even though he thinks he is, even though for most of the 40 minutes of this episode, he acts like he's been alone, and that he is always going to be alone. It isn't until Hera, urges him to get involved, to step in and help the people who've been helping him, Kanan and even Zeb, who does leave him behind at some point. And, let's talk about that real quick. Did Zeb make the right call? Callus had him in the headlock. Odds were against Zeb getting him back. He did seem to bail on him fairly quickly. But, again, that's part of their dynamic moving forward, part of their relationship moving forward. So it's an interesting way to start the show. Obviously, we see with Kanan and Hera, we get a different sort of dynamic than we're used to with Padme and Anakin. We see a couple that exists in the show and has a very different dynamic. They're not keeping anything secret. It's all on Front Street. They sort of bicker. They go back and forth. They agitate each other. They support each other. It's a very one of the more realistic relationships we've seen in a Star Wars series to this point. Particularly in the short, when you watch the first of the animated shorts, The Machine and the Ghost, with just Hera, Kanan, and Chopper, that really, to me, that really hits their relationship on a head of how they love and care and support for each other, but at the same time they can drive each other a little crazy. And we get taste of that in this first episode, and I think we'll get more as the series plays out. We also get introduced to Sabine Wren, who we recognize as a Mandalorian, but is a very different Mandalorian, a very more colorful Mandalorian, wears her armor a bit differently than we've seen other Mandalorians. And we don't get to know Sabine's history. In my recollection, we don't get to learn her backstory for a little bit. I think it's teased out here and there, but she's a very different Mandalorian than what we know. She's into art. She's into these sort of fiery paintball explosives. And an interesting character who's once she reveals what's underneath the helmet, instantly captures Ezra's boyish attention. Obviously, Kanan is the character who strikes us most in the heart as like the heroic character, ultimately revealed to be a Jedi in hiding. Caleb Doom, we will find out eventually, is the name he went under as a Padawan during Order 66, Padawan to Deepa Balaba. Hera Syndulla is our pilot, another great character. We don't get to spend much time with Hera, but she's a good prod for Ezra. She is there to sort of refute his cynicism, his sarcasm, his sort of selfish feelings towards surviving in the galaxy. And I think she does a really nice job of prodding him into action, into thinking of others before himself. So Hera is a character that I think we all instantly connect with because she's the one who is reminding us that we are better than our base survival instincts. Kanan is a bit of a mystery. He's a bit elusive. He doesn't really express himself. but we start to get, Kanan's a complicated character. We peel back those layers over time. And then, of course, we're introduced to Zeb, who I think intentionally is kept mysterious. And for the sake of this podcast, let's go on Zeb's journey together through the show. A new species, we're not familiar with them. We're going to talk about it as the show sort of plays out. And as the show sort of goes on, we'll talk about Zeb and his people and the plight. The other thing I want to bring about for this episode, for this debut, that I did really like is the villains. Obviously we're teased with Vader, we're teased with the Grand Inquisitor. Here in Agent Callus of the ISB, we're going to get a recurring character of significance and of import, and I think what they ultimately will do with this character, the journey that Callus ultimately goes on, is completely fascinating and intriguing. But at this point, he's just a nice recurring bad guy for the Ghost crew as we sort of begin to figure out what the dynamics of the show, how the show's going to kind of work moving forward. And then obviously the dynamic changes by the end of this quote-unquote second episode, or the end of this one big episode, depending on how you view it. And that is Callus reporting to the Grand Inquisitor that he has potentially encountered a hidden Jedi Knight and his apprentice, because by the end of this episode, Callus believes that Ezra is the apprentice of Kanan Jarrus. As far as the episodes go itself, what's really great about the episodes, besides like a lot of the introductions to the characters, is that it is very fast paced. Things move quickly. Ezra goes into the town, has a run-in with some stormtroopers who are bullying a merchant. Then he stumbles upon the crew of the Ghost pulling their heist, interrupts that heist to steal from them. They pursue. The Imperials pursue. It's a lot of action. It's very quick. And then all of a sudden, Ezra's on the Ghost. He's with the crew. They escape Lothal. And just when he thinks it's going to be, time to go back, they loop back around to Lothal and show him a side of the planet he's never seen before. The whole, I forget if it's Tarkinville or Tarkin Town, but like the displaced people who Governor Tarkin has kicked out of their homes and kicked off their land, so that the Empire could seize it for whatever they're up to. And one of the other elements I really like about this episode too is we're not inundated with Lothal's history just yet. They're going to play that out over time. They're going to tease that out. So right now, Lothal is just a planet. It's Ezra's home planet. But we see that the Empire has a presence there. We don't quite know why, other than the fact that it's the Empire. But we see that they are oppressing the people. And now Ezra gets to see that they're oppressing the people. So this is like that first step in Ezra beginning to understand that there's more going on Lothal and in the galaxy than just him trying to make, eke out an existence under the thumb of the Empire. And I think it's really strong. I think it's really great. And then, Ezra finds himself in the position where he knows where the crew of the Ghost needs to go next, which is, they want to rescue some Wookiees, right? But Callus has baited a trap. And Ezra is the one, after the prodding of Hera, who has to get them out of it. Now it gets him captured, but Ezra, we get to see, is fairly resourceful. So I think that's a really good thing too. If you're going to show us this character who, in our first introductions, we see maybe the potential, but he's choosing to act selfishly. But you show us he's resourceful. You show us he doesn't need rescuing. You show us he's quite capable. You show us all this potential of the character. Then we begin to root for that character, so that when the crew of the Ghost comes back to the Star Destroyer where Callus has been holding him, and we find out that he's already escaped on his own, it's great. It's really good stuff. So I really like those elements. As I was saying, the two episodes together, they move really quickly. There's not a lot of time for the characters to just sit there and talk to each other and give us those big exposition dumps that sometimes happen in early episodes to help give us those characters' backstories. This show, at least in my memory, is very good at giving exposition through action, which is really, really nice. So I think we'll get into a little bit more of that as the show plays out as well. But ultimately, this plan they had to rescue some Wookiees from Kessel, well, Ezra's the one who knows they're going to Kessel. So then we get our first taste of Kessel in Star Wars. This is before Solo. This is before we go back to Kessel in Star Wars: The Clone Wars with Ahsoka and the sisters. And we get to pull a little heist. There's no Pikes. It's got a stronger Imperial presence, but we're rescuing Wookiees. And what Star Wars fan isn't a fan of rescuing Wookiees? I was struck by a thought, and I said it's not a new thought. It's just sort of a random thought in my head that how could you be a stormtrooper and support the enslavement of other peoples, other species, especially ones as cool as Wookiees? That really bummed me out. And then we get a little Wookiee child who's trying to escape and run away, and Ezra is the one who goes to save him and sort of cements his status as a potential hero. But we also have the test that Kanan gave to Ezra in the episode as well, which is when Ezra breaks into Kanan's room with his sweet, sweet droid arm, and finds the holocron, finds the lightsaber, and is able to activate the holocron. And I'll be honest, I had forgotten a little bit about that the holocron made its debut in this episode, because, again, I'm an old guy, and the holocron might be the first piece of the Star Wars old expanded universe. Not the first piece to ever cross over into the new canon, but it might have been the first piece of Star Wars expanded universe lore that everyone sort of gravitated towards. Everyone was sort of like, that is a really interesting idea. That is a really fascinating concept that Jedi Masters of the past would pass on their knowledge in these devices. And it's another reminder that despite the fact that the EU was thrown away as, being just ridiculous material that Kathleen Kennedy couldn't harvest anything from, that might have been a little passive aggressive. My apologies. The great ideas from the expanded universe. It's like the Macho Man says, the cream rises to the top, and that's what the holocrons are. Man, they're just a fascinating idea that have now permeated so much of Star Wars lore that that some people might forget that they debuted back in like the early '90s in Star Wars comic books that Dark Horse was putting out. It may have been in, I can't remember if it was in Dark Empire or if it was in Tales of the Jedi, but it's one of the early Star Wars Dark Horse comics, and it's now so entrenched in Star Wars lore that we probably don't even think about that anymore. So ultimately, again, Ezra passes the test. He returns the holocron. He returns the lightsaber that he stole from Kanan. Again, we see that Ezra is quite the pickpocket in these episodes, and in his short episode 2, which is I wrote down the name wrong. But the fourth short is Ezra's episode where he's stealing stuff from a crashed TIE fighter on Lothal. Any hoot. But yeah, it teases us, it shows us, and then we get on Kessel. I think it's called Catch-22 was the plan that Kanan calls in, and the moment where Ezra's like, okay, are you gonna let me in on the secret? And Kanan says, kid, I'm about to let everybody in on the secret. And then he just stands up, starts dodging blaster bolts. The stormtroopers, Callus, all freaking out. And then he engages the lightsaber. And it's like, oh, snap. None of us have seen a Jedi in a while. So this is going to be a new thing. And Kanan dispatches them. And then there's a great moment, too. Again, Ezra using the slap shot against Callus as they come back. Ezra trying to help the Wookiee child. And he gets sent over the edge by the ghost, blasting him in the chest. And he's hanging on for dear life at the end of the episode. And there's another stormtrooper who Ezra had knocked off with his slingshot, also hanging on further below him. And the stormtrooper looks up at Callus and says, first time seeing a Jedi? And then Callus just kicks him in the face and sends him plummeting to his doom. A moment that I LOL'd out loud. Yes, indeed, friends. Yes, indeed. So now we end up with Ezra agreeing to stay on board the Ghost, agreeing to apprentice himself to Kanan Jarrus. And again, we don't get a lot of detail on these characters just yet. We don't get a lot of backstory. But we see their dynamic. We know their characters thrown together by circumstance, by what the Empire has done to them and to their people and to their families. And we see that they have sort of forged themselves into their own little family. Now, that dynamic only grows and only gets richer as we dive back into the show, but we get the first beginnings of it. And, more importantly, as the name of the episode is, we get the sparks of rebellion because, again, as Vader told us in the beginning, hunt down the children of the Force. Any Jedi who have hidden away might begin training people. It's been, again, I want to say 14, 15, 16 years since Revenge of the Sith. The Inquisitores probably hasn't been too busy recently. No one has seen a Jedi in quite some time. So Kanan sparking up that lightsaber, sparking up the idea that the Jedi are still out there, that there's still good guys out there doing good things and standing up to the Empire, the spark of rebellion. And now the Wookiees know. Now the Wookiees know, friend, and the stories will begin. And that's what Kallus appears to be trying to get ahead of when he brings in the Inquisitors to handle the situation. But, as some of us may know, it's far more complicated than all that. Oh, yes, indeed. But I think this is a great debut episode. I actually really, really enjoyed watching this again. As I said earlier, the only part of the episode I thought was clunky was like a little bit of the animation. But I think they definitely refined that as the show goes on. And another element that I really enjoyed of the show was the incorporation of more familiar music that we know from the original trilogy as we begin to get into the era of rebellion against the Empire. So really enjoyed hearing some familiar tones. I can't wait to get into more of these characters, more of what they do. It's Chopper time, and I love me some Chopper. So get ready, friends. Should we talk about Kallus's hat, his helmet? That thing's weird. Looks like he's going to be straining spaghetti out of boiling water. I don't know. But I'm going to give it 8 buckets. This episode is 8 buckets. I think it's a solid, rock-solid beginning to the show. I found it very, very enjoyable. I like a lot of the teases, a lot of the hints they give us. And it's an episode that intrigues us enough about the characters to want to come back and get to know more. So 8, I'm going to give it 8. That's a strong 8 in my opinion. And that's where we're going to stop this episode. Okay, friends? We'll be back next week talking about more Star Wars Rebels. But make sure you're following us on the socials. We're at Mando_Vision, Twitter/X, and Instagram. Email the show, mandovisiontom@gmail.com. Make sure you're liking, subscribing, following, and sharing the show with all the Mandalorians in your covert. If you can, sweet 5-star reviews. They help the small shows like us stand out, not get lost in the shuffle, get more eyeballs on us. I am your host, Nargai Tom, and this is the Mandovision Podcast. I thank you all for being here. Bucketheads, go out there, be great Star Wars fans, be kind, supportive, understanding Star Wars fans, and tune in next week for more Star Wars talk here on the Mandovision Podcast. We're watching Rebels. We're counting down the days to Skeleton Crew. We're counting down the days to the Mandalorian and Grogu movie. We're also counting down the days until I finish reading the comics and the books that I need to finish for some Mandovision Reads episodes. But we'll be back. We'll stay tuned. Get ready for those. All right, friends, Bucketheads. Remember, this podcast can only end one way. This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.